If this story touched your heart or made you think differently about family, love, and self-worth, we invite you to stay connected with us. Every week, we share powerful real-life stories of resilience, emotional growth, and people finding their strength in the face of betrayal or hardship. These are the stories that remind us we are not alone and that it's never too late to start living life on your own terms. Subscribe to the channel, give this video a thumbs up if it resonated with you, and don't forget to turn on the notification bell so you never miss a new story. And if you have your own experience you'd like to share, leave a comment below. We'd love to hear your voice. Together, we're building a space where honesty, healing, and empowerment come first. Join us. Your story matters here. I sat down in the oak dining chair across from my parents and two younger sisters in the same sunlit kitchen of our old farmhouse in Lexington, Kentucky, a place I once considered my sanctuary. The scent of slow-roasted brisket and warm cornbread filled the air, momentarily taking me back to simpler days filled with laughter, scraped knees, and Sunday dinners. But tonight, the warmth was only in the food, not the company. Emma and Riley, my twin sisters, leaned back in their seats, their posture relaxed, expressions oddly confident. My parents, Walter and Irene, exchanged a silent glance before my mother folded her hands neatly on the table and began to speak. "Charlotte," she said, her voice measured, "we need to talk about something important. And we want you to hear it from us directly." I paused, setting my fork down gently. A cold weight settled in my stomach. "We've finalized our estate plans," my father added. His voice was even, but the usual softness had vanished. "It's best we're transparent now so there are no misunderstandings later." Emma crossed her arms, a smirk tugging at the corner of her mouth. "Long story short, it's all going to us." I blinked. "What?" Riley repeated it as if reading from a memo. "The house, the lake cabin, the savings, all of it. You're not included in the will." The room went silent, save for the faint chirping of crickets from the porch outside. I turned to my mother, hoping, praying she would shake her head, say there had been some mistake. But she only gave a small, solemn nod. "We think this is the right thing," she said softly, clutching the napkin in her lap. "You're secure, Charlotte. You have your career, your home. Emma and Riley are still figuring things out. They need a safety net." I looked at my father, waiting for him to say something, anything, but he stared at his glass of iced tea, not once meeting my eyes. A hollow ache formed in my chest, quickly replaced by a surge of disbelief and anger. I had carried this family. For years, I'd helped cover their property taxes, paid out of pocket for my mom's surgeries, and even bailed Riley out of debt twice. And now I was being erased? "So, after everything I've done," I said, my voice tight, "you've decided I'm worth nothing?" My mother let out a quiet sigh, her face laced with what looked like disappointment. "You always make it about money, Charlotte." I clenched my fists under the table, fingernails biting into my palms. "It's not about the money. It's about respect. It's about being the one who was always there, every time you needed someone. And now, because I don't need anything from you, I don't matter." Emma let out a small laugh. "You're being dramatic. Nobody asked you to help. You just wanted to feel important." Riley chimed in, her tone dripping with sarcasm. "Maybe you thought if you saved us enough times, Mom and Dad would love you more." Their words hit like a hammer to the chest. I turned again to my parents, hoping they would scold them for their cruelty. But neither of them said a word. In that silence, I saw the truth. I took a breath and stood, slow and steady. "If that's your decision, then here's mine." Emma raised a brow. "Oh!" "I'm done. Don't ask me for anything. Not help. Not support. Not even a phone call." I pushed my chair back and walked out, the scent of brisket and cornbread clinging to the air like a memory I no longer wanted. No one stopped me. No one called my name. And, just like that, the ties were cut. Everything had changed. And this time, it was my decision. The farmhouse I once knew felt more like a stranger's property as I stepped outside. There was no nostalgia, no comfort, just the cold realization that the ties I'd held onto for so long had already been severed. The screen door clicked shut behind me with an eerie finality. The Kentucky evening was brisk, but all I felt was the flush of anger climbing up my neck. As I drove back to my apartment on the edge of town, I kept the car radio off, a rare choice for me. I didn't want distractions. I needed the silence to let it all sink in. Why did it still sting so badly? Deep down, hadn't I always known? In their eyes, I wasn't a daughter. I was a lifeline, an ATM with a familiar face. Back home, I dropped my keys on the counter and collapsed into the worn leather armchair by the window. My hands trembled as I opened my phone. The conversation played in my head, like a recording on loop, each word another twist of the knife. Emma and Riley were walking away with everything. And me? The one who helped them through every reckless mistake, every crisis they couldn't manage? I was dismissed like I had never mattered. I tapped open my banking app. The numbers glared back at me, indifferent and undeniable. $1,950, my automatic transfer to cover my parents' monthly expenses, utilities, insurance. Another $1,100 split between Emma's rent shortfall and Riley's latest emergency when her freelance checks didn't come through. I stared at the recurring payments section. My thumb hovered over the screen. They said I was self-sufficient, independent, that I didn't need anything, and they were right. But I finally understood I didn't owe them everything just because I had managed to survive without help. No one was standing over me, forcing me to give. 3 seconds. A breath. I hit cancel. A notification appeared almost instantly. Recurring payments successfully stopped. The bitterness was still there, but it was joined by something new: relief. I put the phone down and sank deeper into the chair. I hadn't realized how heavy it had all become until I let it go. The quiet in the apartment no longer felt lonely, it felt like mine. That night, sleep didn't come easily. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. All the compromises, the extra hours I'd worked, the weekend trips I'd skipped, just so my family wouldn't struggle. I had done it because I believed it mattered. But when I asked for recognition, not even reward, just acknowledgement, I was met with silence. The following morning, just after sunrise, my phone rang. Mom flashed on the screen. I hesitated before answering. Marissa, her voice cut in, clipped with panic. Did you cancel this month's transfer? I took a slow breath. Yes, I did. There was a pause. We count on that money, she said quickly, then softened it with a familiar guilt-laced tone. You know how important it is. I kept my voice even. You told me I don't need help, that I'm fine on my own, and you've made it clear I don't matter when it comes to anything else. So no, I'm done footing the bill. Marissa, she snapped, you're acting out over a piece of paper. That doesn't define our love. I let out a dry laugh. Then you'll be fine without my money, right? Ask Emma and Riley. Let them show you how much they care. The silence on her end was thick. This isn't who you are, she said finally, her voice cracking. It's not the daughter I raised. I closed my eyes. No, Mom. This is who I've always been. You just never bothered to look. I ended the call before she could respond. Standing in my apartment, I felt it again, that lightness, like stepping out of deep water and finally breathing freely. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel guilty. I felt free. Back in my apartment, my emotions churned beneath the surface. I knew the phone would ring again. My father would likely try to intervene with his usual calm disappointment. Emma and Riley would surely join in with biting remarks or fake concern, but for once, I felt no urge to respond. I wasn't the emergency contact anymore. I wasn't the fallback plan. I had stepped away, and the silence felt like peace. I left my phone face down on the dining table, sitting still as the early evening light filtered through the curtains. Mom had called me selfish, dramatic, even disloyal, words I'd heard so often they had become background noise. But this time, The accusations didn't land. They didn't matter. What mattered was that I had finally drawn a line. I looked around the apartment, really looked. For the first time, it felt like mine. Not a place to crash between meetings or a base for sending checks and managing crises, but a home. A space where I didn't owe anyone anything. I opened my laptop, pulled up the latest bank records. The list of past transfers glared at me, monthly payments I'd been making out of habit more than anything. Rent support, overdue utilities, personal loans disguised as just until next week. I moved through them methodically, deleting each scheduled payment. $1,000 for the house insurance? Gone. $900 to help cover the car payment? Gone. $600 for Emma's rent? Gone. One by one, they vanished. Every confirmation email felt like a door closing on years of financial enabling. I stared at the now empty schedule and felt lighter. And yet, strangely unsure. For so long, I had been the responsible one, the buffer between my family's irresponsibility and the consequences they refused to face. Without that weight, who was I? I stood, walked to the kitchen, poured a cold glass of water. Outside, the streetlights flickered on, and the hum of Lexington's quiet side streets drifted in. People going about their evenings, living lives untouched by obligation or guilt. I watched for a while, listening to the calm, until my phone buzzed again. "Lucas, what are you doing?" He texted. "Nathan just told me. You cut off the money? You think this is a joke?" I didn't respond. A few minutes later, Nathan followed up. "You're out of the family. Don't expect us to ever look at you the same." A hollow smile crept across my lips, not from joy, but from the clarity that came with the words. They never saw me as family in the first place. I was a utility, a resource, not a sister. I stepped out onto the small balcony. The night air was cool and fresh, brushing against my arms like a reset. I leaned on the railing, took a slow breath, and stared at the stars just beginning to appear. I didn't regret it. Not for a second. I had made the only choice that gave me peace. The next morning, the phone rang nonstop. I didn't need to look. I already knew. Eventually, I answered. "Marissa." Mom's voice was loud, breathless with frustration. "Why would you do this? We need that money to pay the utilities, the property taxes, you know that." I kept my tone even. "Because I can't keep carrying this anymore. Helping your parents is too much to ask? We gave everything for you growing up." I let out a bitter laugh. "Did you?" "Because I've spent years covering every shortfall, every mistake. You didn't raise a daughter, you raised a financial backup plan." She paused, then snapped, "You've changed. All you care about is money now." "No," I said, my voice firm. "You care about money. I care about peace." There was a long exhale, then the line went dead. I stared at the screen just as new messages appeared. "Lucas, you're unbelievable. Mom's crying. Nathan, I hope you're proud. You broke this family." I set the phone down again. They were wrong. This wasn't me breaking anything. This was me finally walking away from something that had been broken for a long, long time. "Because of you, Marissa. Think you're better than us? You'll regret this someday. Don't even bother showing up when Mom and Dad pass." Each message lit up my phone screen like a burning match, and with every one, my jaw tightened. Not a single word of accountability. No attempt to understand. No question of how I'd felt all these years. Just outrage, because I had stopped being their sponsor. The screen lit up again. "Dad." I didn't pick up. The call came again. And again. I silenced it, then opened my contacts. One by one, Emma, Riley, and my parents. I selected block. Then I scrolled through my settings and turned off all notifications from their numbers. When I set my phone down, a strange stillness blanketed the apartment. No more alerts. No more guilt. Just quiet. I stepped outside, leaning on the balcony rail. The morning chill kissed my skin, and for the first time in years, I realized I didn't owe anyone a thing. I wasn't on call. I wasn't their backup plan. I was simply me. Days turned to weeks. No unexpected calls, no messages demanding help or hurling accusations. I began to believe that maybe, just maybe, they had accepted it. That I was done. Then, on a Friday evening, a notification flashed across my screen. It was from my mother. Family meeting. Saturday, 7 p.m. Don't be late. No greeting. No reason. Just that. I stared at the words, tension curling in my stomach. My instinct was to delete it, but a small, reluctant voice inside wondered, what if they're ready to make things right? What if this time was different? Against my better judgment, I agreed to go. The moment I stepped into the old family home, the atmosphere hit me like a wall. The lights were dim, the air thick with unspoken tension. My sisters sat stiffly on the couch, arms crossed, refusing to look at me. Dad stood near the mantel, his face blank. Mom sat curled in her armchair, her eyes red as if she'd been crying for hours. Before I could even say hello, she spoke. "Marissa," she whispered, voice strained. "What are you trying to do, tear this family apart?" I blinked. "Excuse me." Dad stepped in, arms folded across his chest. "Your decision has put us in a bind. You've made things harder than they needed to be. And your mother, she's suffering because of it." I let out a bitter laugh. So now I'm the villain? When I was paying the mortgage, utilities, credit cards, where was her suffering then? Emma rolled her eyes. "You act like you're the only one who's ever helped. Everything doesn't revolve around you." Riley leaned forward, her tone mocking. "You have a career, a decent salary. What's the big deal? Why are you acting like a martyr now?" The accusations came rapid fire, each one sharper than the last. I had walked in hoping for a real conversation. What I got was an ambush. An emotional extraction disguised as reconciliation. I stood, my voice calm but firm. "If this meeting is just about dragging me back into your mess, save your breath. I'm not going back to who I was." My mother stared at me in disbelief. "You're serious?" I nodded slowly. "I've tried. For years, I gave everything I had. But if all I am to you is a bank account, then you don't deserve my presence." No one moved. No one said a word as I walked to the front door. I left without looking back. 2 nights later, I returned home from a late shift at the clinic. It was almost midnight and I was exhausted. But as I approached my apartment, a strange sight stopped me in my tracks. The front door was completely sealed shut, covered in thick, gray industrial foam. The handle, hinges, and lock were encased like a tomb. I reached out and touched it. Solid. Intentional. Someone had done this to keep me out. My chest tightened. My breath caught. This wasn't a prank. This wasn't petty. This was a threat. And I knew exactly who it came from. Locked out of my own place. I didn't waste a second. I grabbed my phone and opened the building security app. The hallway footage loaded slowly, but once it did, I scrubbed through the timeline until I saw the figure. It was Lucas, ball cap pulled low, hoodie drawn tight, but his walk gave him away. He moved with that same exaggerated strut he'd had since high school. He was grinning as he sprayed expanding foam into the seams of my door, sealing it shut with methodical precision. My stomach twisted. This wasn't just a tantrum. This was a deliberate act of sabotage. I dialed the non-emergency police line. When the officers arrived, I played the footage without saying a word. One of them let out a low whistle as he watched. "Do you want to press charges?" he asked. I stared at the frozen frame of my brother walking away from my door, proud of what he'd done. If I didn't take action now, what would come next? I nodded. "Yes, I want to file a report. He needs to be held accountable." The next afternoon, my phone rang. I ignored it. Then it rang again, Dad. Then Riley. I let it go to voicemail until I finally answered. "Marissa," my father's voice thundered before I could speak. "What on earth have you done?" "Your brother got picked up by the police." I kept my voice even. "He defaced my property." "That's a crime." He was upset. He didn't mean anything by it. "He blocked my front door with industrial sealant." "That's not frustration. That's criminal. If he doesn't want to face charges, he can cover the cost of the damage. Dad's voice dropped to a growl. How much? 3,000. You're really going to shake down your own family like this? It's not a shakedown, I replied coldly. It's the price of consequences. The next morning, the money hit my account. Attached was a bitter message from Lucas. You're dead to me. Don't ever contact me again. I read it without emotion. Later that day, another message came in from a second cousin I hadn't spoken to in years. Marissa, is any of this true? I saw a post from your mom. Then another. Heard you turned your back on everyone. What happened to you? I opened Facebook and felt my jaw clench. My mother had posted a long, dramatic update. She claimed I had abandoned the family, that I'd left them without $1, and that they had sacrificed everything to give me a better life, only for me to forget where I came from. The comments were filled with sympathy for her and condemnation for me. This is heartbreaking. Children these days have no respect. She probably got rich and dumped her parents. It was a perfect smear campaign, and none of it was true. No mention of the thousands I had paid over the years. Not one word about the late-night transfers, or the credit cards I paid off for them, or the months I covered both mortgage and medical bills. No hint that Lucas had vandalized my apartment, and that I'd called the police, because I had no other choice. They'd rewritten the story, made me the villain, cast themselves as victims. I sat quietly, phone in hand, the lies still unfolding across the comment section. For a brief moment, I considered walking away from it all, letting the gossip fade over time. But then I remembered every sleepless night, every time I went without so they could have more. I remembered how they had taken and taken and taken without ever once asking how I was doing. No more. I opened my social media and tapped Create Post. If they wanted to go public, then I would give them the truth plain, clear, and undeniable. I wrote everything. 10 years of financial records. Medical bills I'd covered. Education expenses I had absorbed. Emergency loans that were never repaid. Vacations they took with money I'd wired in moments of weakness. And finally, the footage of Lucas sealing my door with foam, followed by the police report. I ended it simply. I didn't walk away from my family. I finally stopped letting them walk all over me. They never really saw me as a daughter, only as a provider. So I hit post. Within minutes, the responses began pouring in. At first, it was quiet curiosity, relatives commenting with shock, asking if what I wrote was real. Then came the private messages. An older cousin messaged me from Chicago. I had no idea you were supporting them all this time. Is that true? One of my uncles commented publicly, this isn't what we've been told at all. Some even confronted my mother in the comment thread, asking why she'd hidden the full picture. But the most intense backlash came from inside the family. My phone rang. Mom. I picked up. Her voice was explosive, full of fury. Marissa, what did you do? I didn't flinch. I told the truth. If you're allowed to post your side, then so am I. She was practically gasping. Do you realize what you've done? Your father's humiliated. He won't even leave the house. What will people think of us? I stayed quiet. And Nathan and Riley, how do you think this makes them feel? My grip tightened on the phone. Did they think about me when I was covering their deaths? When Lucas trashed my apartment door and no one even asked if I was okay. She went quiet for a moment. Then, as always, she pivoted, making herself the victim. You're tearing this family apart. Her voice turned to ice. If you go down this road, don't come back. Don't expect a place here anymore. I inhaled slowly. I didn't ruin anything, Mom. You did. Then I hung up. No guilt. No sadness. Just calm. That was the last time I ever heard her voice. After that, the silence was total. No more texts. No voicemails. No notes pretending things were fine. It was like I had never been a part of them. And this time, I didn't feel abandoned. I felt free. The evenings I used to spend juggling emergency wire transfers and emotional breakdowns were suddenly my own. For the first time in years, I had peace. I immersed myself in work. Our team was developing a complex infrastructure rollout, and I poured myself into it. With no family distractions, I worked with clarity and confidence. I delivered the final proposal 2 weeks early. A week later, I was called into the VP's office. They promoted me. Standing in my new office, framed by tall windows overlooking downtown Lexington, I felt something unfamiliar: satisfaction. The kind that wasn't shadowed by guilt. For once, I could celebrate something without anyone asking me to split it, give it away, or downplay it for someone else's ego. That same night, I opened my laptop and did something I had postponed for decades. I booked a trip. Italy had always been my dream, Florence, especially. But there had never been time. Never been money that didn't belong to someone else's crisis. But now? Now the only person I had to answer to was me. Landing in Florence, I felt like I had walked into a painting. Sunlight lit up the terracotta rooftops. The air was thick with the smell of espresso and fresh basil. Every step down a cobblestone alleyway felt like I was rediscovering myself. I visited galleries and stared at works I had only seen in textbooks. Botticelli, Michelangelo, Da Vinci, so many names I once whispered in college art classes now stood before me in full color. I tasted pasta that melted in my mouth. I drank Chianti while the sun slipped behind domed cathedrals. I was no longer anyone's backup plan. I was just Marissa. One golden afternoon, I sat alone at a quiet cafe off the Piazza della Signoria, sipping a cappuccino, watching the world pass by. "You seem to be enjoying this place," a voice said warmly. I looked up and met a kind pair of eyes beneath tousled brown hair. He smiled, unhurried, gentle. And for the first time in years, I smiled back. His ease was disarming, like he belonged to the city itself. "I think I might be falling for Florence," I said with a soft grin, lifting my cappuccino. He pulled out the chair across from me and sat down without hesitation, as though we were old friends reunited by chance. "Same here," he replied, setting his espresso down. "This is my third visit." I raised an eyebrow. "So, a committed traveler?" He chuckled. "You could call it that." "I'm Alex, by the way. From Manhattan." We spent the next hour in easy conversation. He worked in interior design, with a love for historical buildings and old-world craftsmanship. His voice was steady, thoughtful, with the kind of light humor that made the time slip by unnoticed. I couldn't remember the last time I spoke to someone without tension simmering beneath the surface. There was no pressure to explain who I was, no weight of obligation hanging in the air. Just two people, sharing the same table and the same moment. As I gathered my things to leave, he leaned forward slightly. "If you're still exploring the city, I'd love to tag along sometime." I paused, then smiled. "I'd like that." The next few days unfolded like scenes from a movie. We visited open-air markets, shared gelato flavors, and strolled alongside the Arno River as the sun dipped below the horizon. Alex never asked about my past. He didn't pry. He didn't need a reason to be kind. He was simply present. And for once, I wasn't defined by what I could provide. I was just me. On our final evening together, we sat on a rooftop terrace with a view of the glowing skyline. I looked out at the ancient city bathed in amber light and realized something profound. All those years I'd believed love had to be earned, proven with sacrifice, demonstrated through service. But sitting there with nothing to offer except my company, I felt more seen than I ever had. I had always tried to earn my family's affection, to be enough through giving. But the truth was clear now. I didn't need to prove my worth to anyone. My happiness didn't depend on their approval. When I returned to Lexington, something in me had shifted. Gone was the woman who had once dropped everything to fix someone else's mess. I had reconnected with myself, and I wasn't willing to lose that again. The weeks that followed were filled with peace and progress. I took on new projects at work with fresh clarity. I started going to yoga on Sundays, joined a book club at the local library, and made friends who valued me for my presence, not my wallet. Then, a text buzzed across my phone while I was preparing breakfast. It was from Aunt Lynn, Mom's cousin. "Marissa, I know you're keeping your distance, but I thought you should know your parents are having a rough time. Your dad's working graveyard shifts at the distribution center, and your mom took on cleaning work. They're barely getting by." I stared at the screen. It didn't surprise me. They had never planned for self-reliance. As long as I was providing, they never had to. And when I stepped away, reality caught up with them. I set the phone down and didn't respond. Later that week, someone else mentioned that Emma had been let go from her job, and Riley was still throwing money at a podcast idea that hadn't produced $1. The old Marissa would have dropped everything to step in. But that version of me no longer existed. They had opportunities to change. They didn't take them. As Christmas neared, I wondered if I would feel the ache of absence. But instead, I felt warmth. I invited a few friends and kind relatives over for a small gathering. There was laughter, cinnamon-scented candles, and glasses of wine passed around my living room. Aunt Diana arrived early, arms full of homemade treats and a smile that could melt snow. She wrapped me in a long embrace. "I'm so proud of you, Marissa," she said as she stepped back. I looked around the room. For once, this felt like family. I opened the door with a smile as Diana stepped inside, her arms full of homemade snickerdoodles and cranberry tarts. "You're the only one who's ever told me that you're proud of me," I said softly. She paused, her expression a mix of warmth and regret. "I just wish the rest of the family had seen what I've always known, how much you've done, how deeply you've cared. They never deserved you, Marissa." I didn't respond. I simply poured her a glass of red wine and motioned toward the living room. Soon, more guests arrived, colleagues from work, a neighbor who'd become a friend, and a few kind souls from my book club. They brought laughter, chocolate-covered pretzels, stories from the year, and an ease I hadn't felt in a long time. That night, my apartment buzzed with joy, no judgment, no tight-lipped smiles masking resentment, no unspoken debts hanging in the air. Just connection. Just peace. Just me, surrounded by people who showed up without expecting anything in return. As midnight approached, I stepped out onto the balcony with a fresh mug of mulled cider. The city shimmered below, streets glowing with holiday lights and distant music floating on the cold air. I looked out, and something inside me settled. There was no more heaviness. No more unseen obligations. No more being useful as a requirement for love. Just this quiet, steady sense of peace. The kind I'd chased my whole life. Inside, the fireplace crackled. People laughed around the table, passing cookies and pouring hot drinks. But I stayed out there for a while longer, thinking about everything I'd lost and everything I'd gained. I had grown up believing that sacrifice was love. That the more I gave, the more I'd be accepted. That family meant surrendering your own needs to prove loyalty. But all that giving had never brought me closer to them. They never truly saw me, not as a person, not as family. They only saw what I could offer. When they excluded me from the will, I think they believed it would devastate me. That it would force me to come crawling back, desperate to be part of the fold again. But they miscalculated. They didn't realize that in cutting me off, they gave me something they never intended to, a clean break. A chance to finally step away from a role I never agreed to play. For the first time, I wasn't anchored by anyone else's expectations. I could choose how I wanted to live, who I wanted to spend time with, and where I gave my energy. I could say no. I could set boundaries. I could prioritize myself. I no longer had to brace for phone calls demanding money or guilt-laced lectures about duty. I was free to embrace the relationships that were built on respect, not repayment. I had friends who checked in not because they needed something, but because they cared. I had an aunt who had always quietly believed in me, even when no one else had the courage to speak up. I had a community I built myself, slowly, honestly, and without conditions. My gaze drifted to my phone resting on the coffee table inside. No missed calls. No unread messages. No last-minute apologies. My family hadn't reached out. And for the first time, that didn't scare me. It didn't sting. It just was. I took a sip of cider, the warmth spreading through my chest. I had spent decades shaping my life around their approval. But now I was living for me. And that wasn't cold or selfish. That was survival. That was healing. Marissa's story isn't just one woman's journey, it's a mirror for countless others. We grow up believing family is everything. That blood demands loyalty. That love requires self-sacrifice. But the truth is, not all families love without condition. Not all connections are safe. And when your worth is measured only by what you give, sometimes the most loving thing you can do is walk away. So now I ask you, if you were in Marissa's shoes, what would you do? Would you keep giving in hopes of being accepted? Or would you choose yourself and finally begin again? Leave your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories that challenge the way we think about love, loyalty, and what it truly means to belong.